I would like to take the time. I'm Annie. I'm the program coordinator here at the Alliance for Historic Hillsborough. We work with Suzanne quite a bit, and she is just extraordinarily knowledgeable about the Revolutionary era in Hillsborough. She is an award-winning novelist and who was a Florida native who now lives in North Carolina. Her mysteries transport readers to the Southern theater of the American Revolution, where she brings historic towns, battles, and people to life. She fuels her creativity with Revolutionary War reenacting and visits to historic sites. If you've ever been to any of our programs, you likely have met Suzanne. She comes to a bunch of our stuff, and everyone is always excited to see her. When she's not writing, she enjoys cooking, dancing, and hiking. She is the recipient of a professional development grant from the United Arts Council of Raleigh and Wake County. In 2018, she was appointed by North Carolina's Daughters of the American Revolution to a statewide committee formed by the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources to help share information about and coordinate events of America's upcoming 250th anniversary. She does have a website. You can buy her books there. I am going to put the link to the website. I think I can put it just in the Q&A for everyone. Otherwise, when we send out, we will record this talk today. When we send out the link, I will also send out her website so you can get on and take a look and contact her, order her books and all of that. So without further ado, Suzanne, I turn everything over to you.
Thank you, Annie. And thank you everybody for coming today and sharing your lunch break with me. I feel very, very honored. I would also like to thank Historic Hillsborough for hosting this. And Annie, thank you so much for rescheduling so we don't have to see moving people in the background. The original time at which this was scheduled, that was moving day for me. So a little bit of housekeeping before we move on here. My website is suzanneadair.net or suzanneadair.com. I encourage you to browse around there. I do have a blog that has extensive history stuff in it. It's from authors all over the place who've written about history, and they give little tidbits in there that you probably were taken out of your American history class and your world history class. So it's a really cool thing to read all the relevant history posts. You can also find out, as Annie mentioned, on my website where to purchase my books. They're available at just about every retailer, and you can get them in ebook as well as paperback format. And if you belong to a history organization, a heritage organization like the Colonial Dames, or a civic organization like the Women's Club, and you need to have a speaker, you're in the central North Carolina area, and you need to have a speaker talk about America 250, then contact me. You can contact me through the website, or you can also contact Annie and say, hey, pass this information on to Suzanne, and I will be glad to get back to you and talk to your programming person. Okay, so I mentioned America 250. The 250th anniversary of the American Revolution is going to be celebrated in 2026. This still seems to be some kind of a surprise for a lot of people, but there will be festivities for years before that date and after, because the war went on for like 9 years, and we have a lot of anniversaries to commemorate. When people think of activities in the American Revolution, such as protests and battles, they often think of sites and towns settled by Europeans on or near the East Coast. The oldest European cities in North Carolina are actually on the coast or near it: Bath, Edenton, New Bern, Beaufort, and Wilmington. They were all founded well before the Revolution. But Hillsborough, founded much later, like almost 100 years later or so, and located in the North Carolina Piedmont, has a rich colonial and revolutionary history that I would like to share with you today. It's a history that deserves to be better known, especially for the 250th anniversary. And if we don't speak up about it, I'm afraid it will be lost. So let me pull up a picture here. Here we go. And this is a map of colonial roads in North Carolina. Now, North Carolina's coastal residents first—
Suzanne, we can't, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We cannot see the map.
You can just see me?
We just see you.
Okay. We tested this once before and it was.
I know.
Okay. All right. Let's try this. Okay, hold on just a minute. That's not it. All right.
I'm sorry, everybody.
Here, hold on just a second. Technical.
Totally fine.
Okay. Let me go through the process again.
There we go. We got you.
Yay.
There it is.
Yay, team.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Back to normal programming.
This is a map of colonial roads in North Carolina. North Carolina's coastal residents first came from northern colonies or South Carolina via the King's Highway. And you'll see that one, that's the blue one on the right of the map. That's right along the coast. And they sailed in from the West Indies or Europe, or in the case of the enslaved, from Africa. The King's Highway is named for King Charles II, and it's the oldest road dating from the time of colonial America. It was the first major postal road and European trade route in America. By the early 18th century, the east coast of North America was mostly settled, due in no small amount to travel upon the King's Highway. But during the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the Piedmont area of North Carolina was almost devoid of Europeans and Indians. Yes, that's true. Most Indians were gone for like 100 years, like by the end of the 17th century and even earlier. Before 1740, the human population of the North Carolina backcountry was estimated at just like a couple hundred. The Great Migration of Europeans into the backcountry of North Carolina didn't gather momentum until the late 1740s. So maps from that time show almost no east-west roads large enough for wagons. So where did the people come from who settled North Carolina's Piedmont after 1740, and how did they get there? The founding and settlement of Hillsborough, North Carolina, as well as its colonial and revolutionary history, owes much to two other roads west of the King's Highway, way west of the King's Highway. Before these roads were even completed in the 1750s, they'd already become well-trafficked thoroughfares for European settlers and for farmers and traders moving livestock, produce, and goods for sale in the Piedmont. The Green Road on the far left figures in colorful American frontier history and fiction. It's the Great Wagon Road, also known as the Shenandoah Road because it ran through the Shenandoah Valley. Like the other roads, it started as a series of trails, many paralleling each other, some splintering off from the main road. And you'll notice there's a dotted green line between Roanoke, Virginia, and Salisbury, North Carolina. That was one of those splinters. It was a branch of the Great Wagon Road that was very productive in bringing settlers into the North Carolina Piedmont. The other road important in the European settlement of Hillsborough and the North Carolina backcountry was the Indian trading path, and that was also called the Upper Road. On this map, it's colored brown. It stretched from Fredericksburg, Virginia to Greenville, South Carolina. The interstate highway system in North Carolina that today connects Raleigh, Durham, Hillsborough, Burlington, Greensboro, and Winston-Salem was, during colonial times, parts of the Indian trading path and the Great Wagon Road. Okay. Hold on a minute. I'm going to try to close this now. Oh, no. Okay. Shoot. Nope, that's not it. Damn it. Okay. Oh, yay. Okay. Let me get back on track here. King Charles's Lords Proprietors had offered religious freedom to Christians who settled in the Carolinas. Before these roads were fully completed, settlers were already pouring into the backcountry to take advantage of that freedom. They created quite a diversified population in terms of religions and cultures. Quakers and Moravians, they were pacifists. They tried to stay out of the wars as much as possible. We also had Anglicans, Presbyterians, Methodists, Baptists, and Lutherans. There were also Jews. The Jews had a big synagogue in Charleston, South Carolina, and there were synagogues all up and down the East Coast. Also, some Native Americans were still there. They had their special spirituality, as well as the enslaved people with their beliefs. So by the early 1750s, the great European migration into North Carolina's Piedmont was barreling along. The backcountry had a booming population, a melting pot of people, businesses that serviced travelers, a judicial structure, and road building. There were almost 40,000 Europeans and 3,000 Africans accounted for in the North Carolina backcountry. In 1754, in the place where the Indian trading path crossed the Eno River, a surveyor and cartographer named William Churton laid out the town of Orange, North Carolina on several hundred acres granted by the Honorable Earl Granville. All right, hold on. I'm going to pull up another picture. There we go. All right, can you see this fellow? Annie?
No, we can't see him. But now we can. Now we can.
Okay. Okay. Man, I'm really sorry about this.
Totally fine. We're all a little rusty.
I wish Zoom would just like stay one way.
I know.
So the town, originally called Orange, went through several name changes and was finally renamed Hillsborough in 17.
And if you scroll up, we can see your notes. We can't see the picture. So if you scroll up, the picture was just up there a minute ago. All right.
Where am I? Can you see the picture now?
Not yet. There we go.
Okay.
Now we got him.
All right. So hold on. Can you see the picture now?
We can't. Now we can see your notes again.
Okay. This is unfortunate. I don't know how to fix this.
I think if you go to presenter mode or something like that, that should fix it. I'm sorry, guys. Thank you for your patience.
No.
It's totally fine.
Okay, that's not there. Okay, where do I find?
We can just look at your notes too, and you can just scroll back and forth. It's totally fine. Whatever you feel comfortable with is fine with us.
Anyway, so that was so I stopped sharing that, but that was a picture of Will's Hill. Oh my gosh. Can you see me now?
We can see you, yes.
Yay, okay. All right, I'm going to have to like flash the picture up there and then come back and turn it off. I think that's what I'm going to have to do.
Totally fine. However you want to do it, it's totally fine, but all of it.
All right. So that picture I showed you was the Irish peer, Wills Hill, who was the Earl of Hillsborough and soon to be Secretary of State for the colonies. And he's the man that Hillsborough was named after. Now, although Bethabara was established a year or so before Hillsborough, Hillsborough quickly became the Piedmont's most significant town and remained that way until well after the American Revolution. It had multiple roads converging on it and was a hub of human activity, a gateway for people moving through the North Carolina backcountry. The procedure for farmers settling in the Piedmont very early was to find attractive land that they liked, clear trees, build a house and outbuildings, and plow fields and get right to farming. When they found a land official, now back then they didn't have dedicated offices yet, a lot of the land officials were riding the circuit. And when they found a land official, they'd tell him that they wanted the tract of land and pay him to make an entry. Theoretically then, the land official would issue a warrant for it to be surveyed. Ideally, the surveyor would then draw up a survey and the farmer would pay final fees to receive a deed to the land. So there were actually 4 points that could be logged down in records. But what we find out is that very few of these records actually are complete with all 4 points. So due to inconsistency in record keeping early on, and also in outright fraud, some of those farmers never owned the land that they bought. They discovered that they were on someone else's land and the deed that they paid for was worthless. So a land grab had happened. Government officials in Britain and America, large merchants, men in professions such as surveying and law, they just ignored records of deeds, and laws about maximum acreage. As the 1760s progressed, farmers and small businessmen found themselves in this sort of icky quasi-feudal relationship with these influential and wealthy men. The inequity and repeated failures of North Carolina government officials to appropriately address grievances from residents of the Piedmont exploded with the Regulator Rebellion in the late 1760s. These defrauded farmers and small businessmen rioted. About 75% of the population in and around Hillsborough claimed support for these regulators. And as the months passed, the regulators grew bolder. Now I'm going to show a picture of William Hooper, one of North Carolina's 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence. I hope I'm going to show a picture of him. Oh, gosh. All right, can we see William Hooper yet?
We can see your screen, but we see, if you close out the Zoom cloud meeting thing, then we can see him.
Oh, it says leave webinar. All right, I can't do that.
Make that smaller. There you go. We got him.
Okay, all right, so that is William Hooper. I'm going to stop the share and go back here. So in 1770, at the peak of the Regulator Rebellion, he hadn't signed the Declaration of Independence yet, obviously. He was actually the Deputy Attorney General of North Carolina. So he represented that government that these regulators didn't like very much. This job entailed him traveling around a good deal. And one day when he was in Hillsborough, regulators dragged him off his horse and through the streets. Hooper, of course, was incensed by this, and he angrily reported this incident to Governor William Tryon. So now I'm going to attempt to show a picture of Tryon. All right, can everybody see Tryon yet?
Yes.
All right. So by then, Tryon had heard enough of regulators. In early 1771, he mustered an army of the militia to deal with the uprising. In May, in nearby Alamance County, the regulators and Tryon's army battled. The militia, which included William Hooper and the future father of Raleigh, Joel Lane, defeated the regulators. Tryon then rode through the backcountry, taking prisoners, and brought them to Hillsborough the following month, where he had a trial for 13. He dismissed one case for lack of evidence, condemned the other 12 men to hang. Then the following morning, the day of the hanging, pardoned 6 of those. So after the unlucky 6 were executed, Tryon essentially shook the dust of North Carolina off his shoes and reported to his next post, which was governor of New York. So the spot where the 6 regulators were hanged in Hillsborough can be found to the east of King Street. There's a footpath that goes through there, and you can follow that and find the memorial. Now, technically, the American Revolution started in 1775. As the Battle of Alamance occurred in 1771, it doesn't always get recognition as being related to the war, but it certainly provided the British with a warning of how the backcountry could revolt against government policies. In May each year at Alamance Battleground State Historic Site, there is a battle commemoration that includes living history and sometimes a reenactment. All right, this is Josiah Martin. He was Governor Tryon's successor and the final royal governor in North Carolina. So Josiah Martin took the time to ride through the Piedmont counties affected by the War of the Regulators, including the Hillsborough area, and he listened to people's grievances. Realizing that they had not been treated fairly, Martin actually helped them out, like reducing barriers to trade. As a result, a number of former regulators from around the Hillsborough area then became loyal, not to Britain, not to King George, but to Martin. The consequence of this loyalty showed up in early 1776 when Martin called for loyal Scots in the Cross Creek area to march to the coast and join loyalists there to suppress the growing patriot movement. So about 100 former regulators joined the Scot army. That army was unfortunately defeated in February 1776 at the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge in Pender County. During the years 1778 through 1781, the Patriot General Assembly in North Carolina had to switch locations every time it convened to minimize the risk of people there being captured by the Redcoats. Hillsborough was one of the locations where they met. In 1781, officials chose Hillsborough as the permanent capital, but that lasted until 1788, when Wake Courthouse, now known as Raleigh, was selected as the capital. Okay, and I'm now sharing a picture of Francis Asbury. He was a very famous Methodist minister who rode the circuit and later became a bishop. In August 1780, while the American Revolution was still raging in and around North Carolina, the famed Methodist minister Francis Asbury came to Hillsborough and preached loud and long, those were his words, to 200 people inside Courtney's Tavern on King Street. Even though plenty of the attendees partook of libations while they listened, I mean, this was a tavern after all, Asbury reported that they were decent and behaved well. Good job, Hillsborough. Things heated up for Hillsborough and all over North Carolina the following year. In January 1781, the Patriot government in North Carolina went into panic mode when a British infantry regiment, the 82nd, surprised them by occupying Wilmington on the coast. William Hooper, who'd been living on his estate on the coast, fled on horseback to the safety of Hillsborough, leaving his family behind in Wilmington as hostages to the British. And this is a picture, this picture I'm sharing is of General Cornwallis. In February of 1781, while combing the land looking for Patriot General Nathaniel Greene, Lord Cornwallis occupied Hillsborough for almost a week. During that time, he slept between the three taverns that existed on King Street to avoid being assassinated. So the taverns were Faddis's Tavern, Courtney's Tavern, and Reed's Ordinary. And I think Faddis's Tavern was torn down in the early 1900s. Cornwallis was also looking for loyalists to join his army, and there were some in Hillsborough, but they stayed quiet about it. Loyalists had learned by then to not out themselves to Cornwallis. Hillsborough commemorates Cornwallis's occupation with an annual event, a fun annual event that includes living history and a skirmish reenactment. And this fellow is Thomas Burke. He was a governor of North Carolina. In September of 1781, cunning loyalist militia leader David Fanning led a surprise raid on Hillsborough, where he captured the Patriots' governor, Thomas Burke, and had him marched away as a prisoner of war to Wilmington. At that time, Wilmington was still occupied by the 82nd Regiment. Burke was then transported to South Carolina and incarcerated near Charleston. In November of 1781, the British finally evacuated Wilmington. William Hooper's wife and family made their way to Hillsborough, where they were reunited. Hooper purchased a house formerly owned by Francis Nash on Tryon Street. It's currently privately owned. And Hooper is buried in the old cemetery at Tryon and Churton Streets. By the end of 1781, with the exception of some military activity involving David Fanning, most of the war intensity was finished in North Carolina and had moved on into South Carolina. In 1783, after the Treaty of Paris was signed, the British Army finally sailed from America. So this picture that I'm sharing with you now is a map that was shared to me, with me by a fellow named John Robertson, who he used to be a ranger at Cowpens National Battlefield. And he was one of those people that went out stomping through the brush to find that musket ball or that button that would confirm that a particular field full of poison ivy or whatever in the backcountry had actually had a battle there from the Revolutionary War. And he would mark every one of those with a yellow square. So there's a couple of things to unpack from this, and I'll show this again afterwards. So America's revolution was everywhere except Antarctica and Australia. That's kind of what this map shows. And that certainly makes it look like a world war. Also, in North America, the revolution wasn't predominantly in the northern colonies, as the folks in the north like to believe. And part of his stomping around and finding the evidence, what John found from that, he and other researchers, was that South Carolina is now recognized as the state having the most battles during the war, not a northern state. So despite all this, for the 250th anniversary, the southern states still face a steep challenge in receiving appropriate recognition for their place in the American Revolution. Virginia and South Carolina are expected to put on a big show for this anniversary. North Carolina is in the middle, and the unique history of towns like Hillsborough will go unnoticed unless people like you folks in the audience step forward and help with local and regional 250th anniversary work. Yes, this is a call to action. I realize this, but I feel really passionate about this. I encourage you to get involved with the America 250 program, and let's get history right, because North Carolina was right up there with South Carolina in all the activity. Thank you for listening. Are there any other questions involved here?
Suzanne, thank you so much.
I saw a couple in the chat.
Yeah, so
I'll go ahead and put up John Robertson's picture again.
I'm gonna
Okay,
I can
great.
ask the question, Suzanne. If anyone has any
Here we
questions,
go.
please don't hesitate to add them into the Q&A box. We have a few already. So one is, Suzanne, why do you think some of the future Patriot leaders, like Mr. Hooper, why did he take the side of Governor Tryon during the War of Regulation, but why did he later join the revolutionary cause?
So Hooper actually, so this is a really good question. We get this a lot. And there was this transitory period in between, the War of the Regulation, so say 74, where stuff just started heating up, and Hooper, as well as Joel Lane and some of the others, those two were called mild patriots or moderate patriots. They weren't firebrands like Patrick Henry. or Thomas Jefferson. And so they kind of crept into it more slowly. And it just is more evidence piled on. It started swaying them finally toward the patriot point of view. So it took a while with them. They weren't convinced from the very start. And Hooper, even afterwards, after the war was over, Hooper did a lot of litigation for loyalists that were trying to keep from, being completely, have all their money and their holdings taken away from them. And he lamented perhaps too many times the way that loyalists were being treated. And that really, other patriots started kicking him around for that. And he lost a lot of credibility. It's really unfortunate, but that's the way that it happened. Joel Lane, he was also a moderate patriot. In fact, one of his daughters married a loyalist. That's how moderate he was. But he tended to keep more of a low profile about it. And I don't think everybody got bashed. All the moderate patriots got bashed at the amount that Hooper did. But, it's really unfortunate that happened.
On the opposite side, can you speak to why some of the regulator leaders did not join the revolutionary cause?
Because they considered themselves to be loyal to England, to Britain. They really did. They didn't see themselves as rebellion against Britain. They were angry with the government, the local government that was there in North Carolina.
I always found that so fascinating.
Yeah.
That, because they're so often the regulator movement is kind of referenced as this precursor to the revolution. And when you really dig into it, it wasn't. And so it's always interesting. So that, I had not known that kind of why they didn't join the revolutionary cause. Because when you dig into it, a lot of these regulator leaders wanted nothing to do with the revolution.
Yeah. And it's another area where it shows that it wasn't black and white. It was, really gray.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it shows just how complicated it was. And, I think it also shows that the regulator movement, was not necessarily, it wasn't a revolution per se. They didn't want to break from the government. They just were mad about taxes.
Yes.
Or else we know, obviously, years later, it's going to be, they don't want to be attached to the government. They don't want to be with Britain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, even patriots that signed the Declaration of Independence, like William Hooper, him being moderate, he didn't want a complete separation with Britain. Yeah. And it just became, after a while, there was the Carlisle Peace Conference a few years earlier, in which the British offered America everything except for immediate and complete severance. And the patriots, the real firebrand patriots said, no, it's nothing, all or nothing. And so then the war went on and on for years after that, because they were stubborn. And there were plenty of moderate patriots who were saying, pleading with them, no, please take this. This is a good deal. We can stop more people from dying, but, that's the way it goes.
It's always also interesting to me too, getting into the war, we gave Britain so many chances. I mean, you think of the Olive Branch petition, and, we really, at the beginning, we don't really want to fight. We don't really want to break away. You almost sense this kind of hesitancy. And then, once the war starts, we're like, we're in it, we're doing this, we're gone.
Yeah.
So I always find that just interesting, kind of how we slowly are like, we really don't want to be independent from you. And then once it starts, it's kind of over.
Well, then you realize, after you've been given independence, it's like, okay, well, now the rubber hits the road and we have to do it all ourselves.
Yeah. I think I always find that I love the Revolutionary era, but I always find that amazing. I mean, the fact that, so if you really think about how much goes into creating a country, and what we did with that, and we are now, we had been the strongest. Whether or not we still are the strongest, I think everyone can debate. But we are a superpower. one of the top countries in the world. And it's incredible what all they were able to accomplish.
Yeah.
Um,
And the brain power that
Yeah.
existed there. I mean, I'm just amazed, at the high IQs of a lot of these guys that just kind of wound up in that one place, all funneled
Yeah.
together. Yeah.
I know. You're like, all these just amazing people just happen to live at the same time. Although I do wonder, I've always thought that. And then I did read something where it said how many Thomas Jeffersons have existed that we don't know because we haven't had a need for him.
Yeah.
And that you're like, oh, maybe are there other, of course they're brilliant people in every generation, but have there been a lot of these other just wonderful, beautiful minds like Benjamin Franklin, and that we just haven't needed them.
Yeah, they haven't risen to the occasion, or they haven't been in a position to rise to the occasion. Yeah. It's a really interesting thought. Although I got to wonder about Ben Franklin sometimes. Little anecdote here. So Ben Franklin is considered to be the first storm chaser in America. Actually, I think, official storm chaser. Ben was fascinated on the whole topic of tornadoes, and he communicated back and forth with the French about it. And, they would trade stories and stuff, but Ben never actually got to witness a tornado except one time where he was down visiting a friend of his in Maryland. And while they were out, he and his son and the friend were out riding. They looked over there and a tornado, obviously an EF0, was forming right in front of him. And Ben takes off on his horse and starts trying to flog the funnel with his riding crop. And after a while, his son caught up to him, was like, "Dad, stop." He noticed there was trees and stuff, limbs and things falling around them because they were in the debris ball. And Ben finally was like, "Okay, yeah, that might be a good idea to stop." But he was just, sometimes when you get so far along in the science path, you forget about common sense.
I was going to say, I think his intellectual curiosity probably made him somewhat fearless, which is both amazing and horrifying, I think, at the same time, because you're like, you really could have gotten hurt doing half the stuff that you did.
The lightning thing is what we know about the most, but it's like, I've been spreading this story about the tornado finally. It's like, he wasn't just crazy with lightning, he was crazy with tornadoes too. And Nils has got another question on here. Hi, Nils. We saw you a while back. I didn't know. I remember Nils was on there. Yeah.
We've got two from him. So at the end of the war, were the loyalists in Hillsborough subjected to reprisals or forced to immigrate? Many loyalists immigrated to Nova Scotia in the aftermath of the war once their homes were confiscated by the Patriots. Do we know anything about the loyalists here?
All I know is that it was kind of standard operating procedure. And that process actually started with the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge and that aftermath. A lot of the loyalists left at that point.
Yeah.
And, it's really lamentable because, again, there was more brain power. There was, especially that Scottish group that was down there in the Fayetteville Cross Creek area.
Yeah.
So there were some very talented merchants and ministers and so forth that were there. And they just, I would say a good 75 to 80% of them just up and left after the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge. They didn't want to face the stuff that was coming down the pike after that. Now, I don't know, I don't have exact figures for what happened after in the aftermath of the American Revolution to the loyalists in North Carolina specifically. But I know that everything I've read, it's like all the loyalists everywhere were subjected to, get out, we're taking, everything's being confiscated. There are a few exceptions, of course. If you were one of those moderate loyalists and, you had really good neighbors and you kept your mouth shut about a lot of stuff and didn't mess around with people and, were kind and everything, then they let you stay. But then you had to keep your mouth shut the rest of the time you were living there. I mean, really?
I do think I could be wrong, but I think some of the loyalists went, especially in the South, I think some of them went west because the British still occupied past the Appalachian Mountains. The British still occupied that area. So I think some of them went there. And an interesting fact about this house, so the Dixon House was originally located, if you're familiar with Hillsborough, was originally located where the Walmart is now, which is about 2 miles kind of east of us. There's a plaque there now, but that property was about, I think, 400 acres, and that original property belonged to a loyalist family. This is from what I've been able to find. That property belonged to a loyalist family and was confiscated by the North Carolina colonial government. So a lot of these colonies, which I guess about halfway through the revolution obviously became states, but they confiscated a lot of this land, and the original property of this house that then became a farm and all that stuff was confiscated from a loyalist family. And I don't know what happened to the family. My assumption, like you said, Suzanne, is that they just left. Where they went, we don't really know, but the original land was owned by a loyalist group, because they were certainly around here.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I know it was almost like a mix. Hillsborough, they tended to be a little bit less vicious about, it's like everybody kind of blended together better in Hillsborough once you got into the Piedmont.
Yeah. I think a lot of people too kept their mouths shut.
Yeah.
After they got more into the war, I think a lot of people were just like, we're not going to say whatever side we were. We're just not going to talk about it. Another one from Niles. Considering the viciousness of the atrocities that Patriot and Loyalist militias committed in the Southern Theater, do you think Tarleton tends to be unjustly vilified?
Well, he wasn't the only, total war commander. There were Patriot total war commanders too. And okay, of course, I'm blanking out on names here. I do know George Washington's cousin, I think it was William Washington, I forget his name, but George Washington's cousin was pretty hard-nosed about things too. So Tarleton did stuff that they did. I mean, they all did the same kind of just really brutal stuff, and, set civilians' homes on fire and stuff like that, and just ousted them with just the shirts on their backs and things. And the thing was that Tarleton really got the brunt of things. Of course, he was on the losing side for one thing. And let's see. I'm trying to think of the name of the battle in South Carolina that
Cowpens.
Not Cowpens, no. There was another one earlier in 1780, not Monk's Corner.
Let's see if I can find it. Hold on.
It'll come to me in just a second. Where Tarleton was knocked unconscious, partially semi-conscious for part of it, and his men thought he was dead. So they went ahead and they just brutally massacred other soldiers on the Patriot side who were surrendering. So Waxhaws.
Was it Camden?
It was the Waxhaws.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's actually a mass grave there that's, where they put in all the guys that got slain there. The Patriot commander rode off on his horse and just left his men. He abandoned his men there. That was Buford was his name. But Tarleton finally woke up, he finally regained consciousness, and he realized his men were just going ballistic over the Patriots. And so he finally got them calmed down, but it was too late because you'd had all this slaughter. So I can't remember so it was in the Waxhaws, but I don't know if that was the name of the actual battle. But anyway, so Tarleton was actually snubbed at the Patriot Victory Feast after Yorktown, where Cornwallis had said Cornwallis was so mad about that, about having to surrender, that he sent a subordinate officer out to actually surrender. But then there was a feast afterwards where all the British officers were invited to dine with the Americans. And this was kind of the civil part of war that doesn't happen anymore. And so Tarleton was snubbed. They, because of that incident, that battle, and I've forgotten the name of it. I keep forgetting the name of it.
I looked it up. It looks like it is the Battle of Waxhaws.
Waxhaws. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very good. So he was snubbed, but the French invited him to dine. And so he then had a good relationship with the French for a long time, for many decades, and may even have met Thomas Jefferson. They may even have been over there at the same time, and him running into Thomas Jefferson at a party, which would have just frosted Jefferson, because Jefferson had to abandon his, Monticello while Tarleton's cavalry was coming at the place to search for him. So So Tarleton, and then Tarleton got further blackened in the centennial celebration. That's when a lot of the monster stories about him came out. That's, the butcher, those kinds.
He was portrayed pretty horribly in The Patriot too.
Oh, yeah, that was ridiculous. That was totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
If something like that had actually happened, you can bet that people would have talked about it and just a mile a minute. One of the stories about him is that when he was in Virginia, he came across a woman who was like 6 months pregnant, and he cut her belly open and killed her and hung the baby, the fetus up on the tree, and so it's like, but we didn't hear anything about that at the time that it happened. Yeah. That story started appearing like toward the centennial, where it's like the Victorian Americans were making up this stuff about Tarleton, and he became the boogie monster. And that's really what happened. I mean, I don't think he was any worse than some of those Patriot commanders that did stuff like Piles hacking defeat in North Carolina. There was a bunch of loyalists that were just hacked on it there.
Yeah. Now I'll just mention that Light Horse Harry Lee was also brutal in his of the loyalists.
That's the one I was thinking about, and I couldn't remember his name. And he was actually the father of Robert E. Lee. He had him very late in life.
Yeah. Here's another question. What was the slave population of Hillsborough in 1781? Did any of the local enslaved people join the British when they occupied Hillsborough?
Okay, I do not know the answer to either of those questions. Do you have any input on that, Annie?
I don't. And this is where it's really hard, is that there were slaves here, and it is likely that some of the local enslaved population from this whole area joined Cornwallis's army when he did come through, but it's very hard to find the data on that. I can't even find the data on where there likely would have been a slave auction site here in Hillsborough, because it was such a hub for trading and market activity, but the data is very hard to find. I have not been able to find even the slave population for this specific area for 1800. So we don't know. It's out there, but I don't know, not through lack of trying, but I do not know what that is. But it is there certainly were slaves here, and it is very, very likely that some of that enslaved population from all over the state, all over the colony, would have joined the British Army and followed them.
Sure, because that's what happened in other places too. Now, then one of the questions that I've wondered about is that I have heard but have not found research to confirm it, that farther west, deeper into the Piedmont, there were fewer and fewer slaves.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. There were slaves here again, but not a lot, because the bigger enslaved populations were closer to the coast, closer to, likely where these larger plantation homes would have been. And that didn't really exist in this part of the state. So, for everyone watching, just keep in mind, North Carolina did not have a large slave population in general, and in comparison to like Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, stuff like that, just because the farms were much smaller, and the small farmers couldn't afford to own slaves.
And there were also the religious institutions that, it's like slavery was just, forbidden. It was a horrible thing that they recognized that it was horrible.
Yeah, there was a large Quaker population around here, and most big Quaker groups did not believe in owning. Please forgive the phone call. Most Quaker populations did not believe in owning slaves.
Right.
So, yeah. Then the last question is, will a recording of this talk be made available? And the answer is yes. I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm in the office. So yes, a recording of this talk will be made available. It takes me a little while. I have to just edit it down. But then I will email it out by the beginning of next week.
Okay, thank you. And maybe you can edit out some of me fumbling around trying to find these.
We're all a little Zoom rusty. It's totally fine. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Suzanne, thank you so much. As always, you are such a delight and such a wealth of information. I will include, when I do send out the email with the recording, I will include Suzanne's website so everyone can go there. If you have any questions for her or want a direct contact, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm happy to send it out. I looked to see if there was a chat box where I could put her website, and it doesn't look like that is available right now. So I'll just email it out to everybody. If you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us on your lunch hour. Suzanne, again,
Wait.
Thanks. Yes.
Wait, one more thing. So if you want to start the Michael Stoddard series, which is set here in 1781 in North Carolina, if you want to start that one, Regulated for Murder, the second one, is actually set mostly in Hillsborough, and it's standalone. You can actually start there and, into the series, and then go back and read the first book, Deadly Occupation. But a lot of people from Hillsborough actually do start the Stoddard mystery series with Regulated for Murder.
And the series is wonderful. I've read it. It is wonderful. It's very exciting. And it's fun to read about places you recognize in North Carolina. So they're excellent.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Annie, for having me again and putting up with this fumbling around with the technology and everything.
I feel like I've lost my millennial status many times because I didn't know how to screen share the other day. So it is totally fine. We're all learning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.